من الشيطان. Okay. أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. والصلاة والسلام على رسول الله وعلى آله وصحبه أجمعين. رب اشرح لي صدري ويسر لي أمري واحلل عقدة من لساني يفقهوا قولي. So when I was thinking about what I wanted to speak about today, I came up with this title. And that title was How to Connect to Allah in Everyday Life. And the reason why I chose this title is because, number one, I think we live in a world that is not conducive necessarily to connection. We live in a very disconnected world. And that might sound ironic because the reality is that if I want to send a message to someone in Tokyo, I can send it and it'll arrive in seconds, right? And yet, although we are connected, in that sense, right, through social media, through the internet, but in a sense, we've become very emotionally disconnected, not only from each other, but also from God. And so, what I wanted to talk about was how can we, because the reality is we live in this life, right? We can't deny that this is the nature of dunya, and more so, this is the world we live in. We realize that to be righteous, it doesn't mean that you disconnect completely from worldly things, right? It doesn't mean that you go off into a cave necessarily, and that's the only way to be righteous. It's not. Islam came to teach us how to be godly, how to be righteous within our everyday life. It's not only that you can worship Allah when you're in i'tikaf, when you're in the masjid. It's not only that you can worship Allah in a cave, but the Prophet ﷺ, when we look at his journey, we find that his journey was one where he was in the cave at one point, right? But then Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala told him to do what? To rise up. Even when Allah revealed and Muzammil and Mudaththir, that he was trying to, he was saying Zammiluni, that, clothe, wrap me, cover me, because of the intensity of the mission that he had and the experience that he had. But Allah is actually telling him, for example, stand up and warn. So he's being told to engage people, to be involved in life. And his entire life, after his entire mission and his sunnah, is an example of a person who engaged in life. He was a father, he was a husband, he was a friend, he was a political leader, he was all of these things, and at the same time, he was close to Allah. You understand what I'm saying? So we have to stop. I know a lot of times we hear this dichotomy, like deen or dunya, right? This idea that like which one is it going to be, right? But if you study the sunnah of the Prophet ﷺ, he lived in dunya. Yeah. I mean, obviously, and he didn't live like a monk in the sense that he wasn't celibate. He married women. Yeah, he had children. He didn't live like a priest or a monk where he wasn't involved in these things. So what he sets up for us is an example of how to be in the world and yet be connected to Allah, right? And that's what we have to extract from his life, his example, and then his prescription of how to do that so that we can live that way. We are told to be a people who are involved, engaged, active in the community, members of society. We're not told to just be separate, like have our own little area separate, but rather we're supposed to be involved and at the same time connect to Allah. So the question becomes how, all right? Before I get into the specifics of how, I want to just give conceptually the importance of this. In terms of success, right? Everyone wants success, right? Is there anyone in this room who actually doesn't want success? Like, not me, right? Everyone wants success. Muslim, non-Muslim, atheist, agnostic, everyone wants to be successful in whatever way they define success, okay? But we have to be very, very clear about the definition of success. What's the real definition of success? Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala tells us in the Quran, there's a very beautiful dua of Ibrahim alayhi salam, extended dua, and in this dua, Ibrahim alayhi salam is asking Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, وَلَا تُخْزِنِي يَوْمَ يُبْعَثُونَ. do not disgrace me on the day when everyone is brought back. يَوْمَ لَا يَنْفَعُ مَالٌ وَلَا بَنُونَ. When it's on the day when nothing's going to benefit anyone of wealth or children. Why wealth and children? Because if we look around our life here, these are the kinds of things that benefit people, in the sense that it becomes a currency of status and power. But Allah is telling us that on that day, none of that's going to matter. It's not going to benefit anyone. It's not going to help anyone, their wealth or their children. Or in other words, children, here's also an indication of power. Okay? So, يَوْمَ لَا يَنْفَعُ مَالٌ وَلَا بَنُونَ إِلَّا مَنْ أَتَى اللَّهَ بِقَلْبٍ سَلِيمٍ. Except for the one who returns to Allah, who comes to Allah with a heart that is sound, with a heart that is healthy. Alright? So it becomes very important now. Allah has just told us, like the Lord of the universe, right? Ar-Rahman Ar-Rahim has just told us that the only thing that's going to benefit me or you or anyone is this one aspect, this one criteria. So does it now become important and incumbent upon us to focus on it? Like, okay, let's figure this out, right? Because Allah is telling you everything else isn't going to matter. You know the things that seem to matter here? You know how you look, how much money you have, what you drive. You know, we live in SoCal, let's be honest. You know what I'm saying? These things are the things that matter, right? What you drive, who you know, what you wear, how you look. And then, you know, you have different cultures and it's about how body you are. And the idea is that these are the things, Gori means light skin. And these are the things that become a currency that matter to people. And so Allah's coming and saying none of that's going to matter. The stuff that you all compete about and that you care about, they're not going to matter. None of it. Illa. And when Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala uses this structure, you find the structure in a few places in the Quran. One of them is the most obvious, and it's the statement of faith, the declaration of faith. La ilaha illallah. Same kind of structure, which is that you negate everything else first. Right? You say La ilaha first, so you have a clean slate. La ilaha means there's nothing worthy of worship. That's what La ilaha means. And the concept of ilah is quite deep, which I'll get to in a second, in the discussion of qalbun salim. But here you're talking about Allah saying there's nothing worthy of worship. And then He introduces the only thing worthy of worship by saying, illallah, except Allah. Alright? Now, you see this also in the case where Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala talks about our purpose. وَمَا خَلَقْتُ الْجِنَّ وَالْإِنسِ إِلَّا. You hear the illa again? وَمَا خَلَقْتُ الْجِنَّ وَالْإِنسِ means we haven't created jinn and human beings for any purpose, for any reason. And then He says illa. Now again, illa here is coming in as the only one singular purpose on a clean slate. So that we don't get confused. We don't think that maybe our purpose is being rich and worshiping Allah, you know what I'm saying? Or some other purpose along with it. So Allah says, وَمَا خَلَقْتُ الْجِنَّ وَالْإِنسِ. We have not created human beings, jinn and human beings, إِلَّا, again the إِلَّا لِيَعْبُدُونَ, except to fulfill ubudiyya, except to worship Allah, except to serve Allah, except to love and obey Allah. All the that goes into the concept of ubudiyya, of being a slave of Allah. One thing to note about slavehood to Allah is that it's completely opposite of being a slave to a human being. It's complete opposite. Can I tell you why? When you think about slavehood, being a slave, what do you envision? If I tell you, think of a slave, what comes to mind? What kind of images do you get? Just throw it out. Okay, try to close. What else? A slave. Chains. Basically, when you think of slave, you think of a person who is bonded, like who's in bondage, right? A person who's oppressed, right? Now, what's amazing about being a slave to Allah is it actually frees you. It's the complete opposite. And why is that? That might seem counterintuitive, perhaps. But the reason is that when you become a slave to Allah, you are freeing yourself from all other kinds of slavery. And the reality is we're all slaves. And that's what people don't necessarily realize, is that everyone's a slave. The atheist is also a slave. The agnostic is also a slave. The Christian and the Jew is also a slave. But the question is, what are they a slave to? It just differs. That's it. It's the only thing see the one who takes his hawa is your desire, your own inclination. Not just what you want, but what you think, right? Your opinions, your inclinations. People who Allah says there are people, you see the one who takes that, their own desires and inclinations, their hawa, as their ilah, as their object of worship. So they're worshiping something. They're slaves to something, but it's not God. It's their own desires. It's, if you feel it, you do it. You know what I mean? It's like, obey your thirst. That's right. But the idea here is that's it's actually very interesting if you study marketing. Anybody who studies marketing in here? No? If you study marketing, or even if you just look at the way that things are marketed on billboards and ads, you'll start to really recognize this underlying theme, which is worship your nafs, worship your desires. If you feel it, do it. You know what I'm saying? Because that's how they sell things. Simple as that. Sprite says obey your thirst, yeah? Just do it. Nike, yeah? Pepsi, live for now. You get it? So the idea is you sell this. This is what I'm saying. We live in a world that is not conducive to divine connection. It's actually, every single day, from every direction, we're being bombarded with obey your own desires. Worship your own self. Your opinion matters most. This whole idea of where somewhere along the line we thought that if I don't get it, then it must be wrong, right? Well, I don't get it. You know what I'm saying? Well, who are you? I don't really understand when you became God. But the idea is we have this worship of our own selves. I worship my own understanding. I worship my own intellect. I worship my own rationality. You hear a hadith and you say, well, that doesn't make sense to me. You know what I mean? That doesn't make sense to me. And of course, we have it more and more with the youth because we'll talk about millennials, I promise. But there are trends that we're seeing more and more, right? This is being fed to us, that you are God. Do you know what I mean? What matters is what you desire, right? You're in charge. Yeah? Your ideas are what matter. So unfortunately, it becomes a worship of the self. That's what it is. So what happens is, of course, there's all other kinds of worship. There's worship of money. There's people who take money as an ilah, money as a master, as a god, as a lord, as an ilah. And they take money and they put it at the center of their existence. That's worship. Okay? So fashion. Fashion can also be an object of worship, right? When everything is just about what's in fashion. And it starts to dictate how we do everything, or what we will and will not wear becomes based on the Lord of fashion. So it's like it doesn't matter anymore if it's in complete contradiction to what Allah says. But if it's in fashion, I obey it. It's a sort of sami'na wa ata'na. It's a sort of we hear and we obey. You guys understand what I'm saying? And it's problematic. These are subtle things, but it's very problematic. Because we have to be conscious of what it is we're giving our ultimate obedience to. Is it society? Is it what's in fashion? Is it what people think? Oh, that's a big one, right? That's a huge one. And it's almost ingrained in us as children, isn't it? But what are people going to say, right? But what are people going to think if you do X, Y, Z? Or what are people going to say if you don't do X, Y, Z? And it's almost like we have this thing in our head where now we start to hear that. But what are people going to think? That's a type of worship. And it has very ugly consequences, by the way. I'm just going to tell you one ugly consequence of this type of worship. And that is, for example, this is just to show the level of sickness that we have. And that is, a woman could be abused. And she's told, just be patient, just accept it, just take it, You understand? It's very serious. And we're so worried about what people think of us and what they're going to say about us. So I'm saying that there's very ugly consequences to taking something other than Allah and being a slave to it. Whether it's what society is going to say, what people are going to say, what you look like, what you wear, your money. Sometimes it's other people in our lives, and we put them as an ilah. We put them as an ilah. And this is very subtle as well. And I'll tell you one of the most common ways that I've seen and I've experienced, and in fact you might even be encouraged to do this, is taking your own children and putting them at the center of your universe. Whoa, what's she talking about? That's like what? I'm talking about taking your own children and putting them at the center of your gravity. You know? In another way to put it is they're at the center and you just spend your life doing tawaf around them. Especially your sons, let's be honest. Okay? And so what happens is, you are not just harming yourself, but you're harming your child. I'm going to tell you what you're doing. You're raising, number one, a very emotionally and spiritually unhealthy human being who will feel entitled for the rest of their life of such type of worship. Yeah? Tawaf. Yeah? And you wonder now why we have an issue sometimes between the wife and the mother-in-law. I'm just telling you the spiritual cause of that issue. It didn't just happen on the day of the wedding. But the seeds of it were years ago. And that is this. The mother, she didn't have a balance in the way in which she raised her child, in the way that she interacted with her child. And so what happens is if a woman takes her child, namely her son, and puts him at the center, right? And now she's just revolved her entire life around him. Nothing else, like she gave up everything else, her own individuality, maybe her own studies, her own everything that's hers, because that would be selfish, right? That would be selfish. And the reason I'm saying this, and this sounds weird, right? But we're taught this. We're taught that that's being selfish, to have your own thing, to take care of yourself is selfish. And we're taught that we're supposed to actually live in this very unhealthy, imbalanced way. But the reality is Allah was supposed to be in the center. And I know this sounds strange because you're like, but I'm just trying to be a good mom. But you're actually not being a good mom, and you're harming your child and you're harming yourself. So what happens is, I'm just being honest here, what happens is, a person who has done tawaf around someone their entire life isn't about to just let that go just because he got married. Let's be honest. You know what I'm saying? And all of a sudden, it becomes a competition. That's not healthy. Yeah? It should have never been a competition because y'all are completely different. But the reason it's a competition is it's an unhealthy consequence of an unhealthy attachment from the beginning. And I'm telling you something maybe that sounds strange, but the reality is that if you really want to love your children in a healthy way, you put Allah at the center. Your children are not your master. You know, as the Prophet said, one of the signs of the Day of Judgment is that someone will give birth to their master. Get what I'm saying? That's not healthy. That's not healthy. It's not healthy for anyone. And so what we have to do is come back to balance and understand that when I become a slave to Allah, I'm freeing myself from being a slave to all these other things. And so being a slave to Allah is actually freeing myself. It's not bonding myself. It's not oppressing myself. It is liberating myself. So to enslave myself to Allah is to reach freedom, true freedom. Understand? Okay, so in this, Allah tells us in this dua, right, that the only thing that's going to matter is the one who comes to Allah. إِلَّا مَنْ أَتَى اللَّهَ بِقَلْبٍ سَلِيمٍ. Now the question is, what is except? Allah saying, except the one who comes to Allah with a heart that is salim, the money doesn't compete with Allah. Your children don't compete with Allah. And again, that sounds strange. How can my child? Is Yasmin saying that I'm not supposed to love my children? Right? Is Yasmin saying I'm not supposed to love my spouse? Is she crazy? Yasmin is not saying either of those things. Yasmin is saying, I'm saying, that there should be no competitor with Allah. There is a difference between loving your children, loving your spouse, even love your money for God's sake. But it should never compete with the love of Allah. And there's very subtle ways that this happens. Okay? I'm going to give you guys an example. When Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala put a law about riba, for example, right? Riba, usury / interest. There's discussions about what that means. Yeah? And I say, but I need a savings account for my children. Because I love my children. Because I want my children's future. But hold up. That savings account is including riba. No disagreement about that. And so what I've done is, I've made my focal point. What am I making my focal point? My children. Over Allah. It's something very, very serious. Because Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says about interest, about riba, what He says about nothing else. That these people who He's saying those who do not give up this usury, this riba, that they should prepare for a war waged against them by Allah and His Messenger. That's pretty intense, yeah? And so we take this lightly. Why? But because of love. You understand? It's out of love. You're not getting that money so you can go like kill someone. You're doing that with love. You understand the problem. And similarly, you're going to find this in many cases, and other cases as well. If my love of money is competing with my love of Allah, then what happens is when I'm faced with a choice, I have a business, and I know that this business will make more money if I sell alcohol, for example. Simple example. So what I'll do is, I'll have the zabiha meat and alcohol at the same place. Tell me you haven't seen it. Yeah? So you know there's everybody's happy. I was on this airline once, and I think the flight attendant was like, everything is halal. Like, even alcohol? Like, the idea is this. It's like, because why? What's the test there? The test is, well, you're going to make a lot of restaurants, they make the money on their alcohol. And so it becomes a test that, well, okay, is my love for my money more than my love for Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala? I'll give you another example. I may love for people to look at me and say, ooh, look at her car. Yeah? Or, look at her house. Look at how grand it is. Look at how she's driving this kind of car. Or he's driving this kind of car. And as a result of my love to hear that, I get these things using massive amounts of what? Riba. Do you understand it? And so the idea becomes, where is my greatest love? And is there a competition in my heart? Is there a competition? And you know what? We're human. And we have these things in our hearts. But this has to be what we are cleaning out. This has to be something we're focusing on. And I mentioned earlier this issue of fashion and stuff. It may seem like, what's the word? Trivial. But subhanAllah, it's interesting. When I reflect on how much fashion has changed, I'm always like in shock. I don't know, those of you who've ever heard me go off about stage, you know how I feel. But I'm going to just say one thing for a second. Put aside, okay, I won't put aside, but for a moment, put aside the modesty issue for just 1 second. Just 1 second about it. Men, yeah? 5 years ago, 7 years ago, if you told a man to put those tights on, every man, almost every man, would have been like, not like over my dead body. is the fact that we have to be conscious of where is the tide taking me? Where is the tide taking me? I ended up in a place I would have never imagined myself in. And that's because we sometimes just go where the tide takes us. And that's quite dangerous. We have to be careful of that. We have to be careful, what am I worshiping? Just ask, what am I worshiping? Am I worshiping what fashion says? This samana wa ata'na is the essence of worship. Do you know what samana wa ata'na means? When Allah describes the believers, He says they are the people who say samana wa ata'na. What is samana wa ata'na? We hear and we obey. You tell me to do it, I do it. You know what I'm saying? You love someone, they say jump, you say how high. Right? Fashion says do this, we hear and we obey. Then now fashion changes it up. You know? It's like there was a time, I still remember, when jeans looked still like pants. Those pants are long gone, let's be honest. Even for little girls, I can't even get a pair. You can't. Come on, I'm saying something not true. You just want to get a pair of jeans for a little girl. You can't get them anymore that look like pants. They're either, it's like one time, I just tell you this, it's really funny. I got this catalog, like in the Museum for Justice, yeah? It's like a little girl shop. Little girl, okay? Meaning like 6-year-old girls. And it was like a nice image of all the different kinds, all the various kinds of jeans that they had, the styles, and how different they were, how many different options we had. Well, basically, here's what it was. It was tight, tighter, tightest, the most tight so you can't breathe. And now those are my options. I'm just like, what if I don't want to get tights and I just want to get jeans for her? You know what I'm saying? So my whole point is that we weren't always here. I'm maybe older than some people in this room, and I remember the days. Maybe I'm aging myself by saying this. I remember the days of jeans. You know, when they were jeans, when they were tight. So my point that I'm making here is it's not the point isn't about skinny jeans. The point is about where are we letting the tide take us, and are we having a clear understanding of what am I really worshiping? Okay, so this is the concept of an ilah. And when we talk about qalbun salim, when Allah says, إِلَّا مَنْ أَتَى اللَّهَ بِقَلْبٍ سَلِيمٍ, how do I build this sound heart? Well, first, I wanted to just explain what that sound heart is. And then I'm going to talk about the practical ways to build that, yeah? So a sound heart is a heart that doesn't have a competitor with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And ultimately in love, yeah? But not only in love, but also in fear. That you do not fear something as you should only fear Allah. You do not fear something as you should only fear Allah. You do not put your hope in something as you should only put your hope in Allah. That you do not put your dependence on something as you should only put it in Allah. This is the real meaning of Tawheed. See, oftentimes we sort of almost trivialize the concept of Tawheed. We trivialize La ilaha illallah to just mean, okay, we just worship one God. We just worship one God. But really what we mean is, yeah, we do this ritual to one God. The ritual of prayer. We do the ritual of dua to one God. But in my heart, I love my money more. Yeah? I say La ilaha illallah, yeah, when I pray to Allah, I'm not praying to an idol. But in my heart, I have idols. Make sense? In my heart, there's things, and you know, whether it's money or it's status or what do people think, what are people going to say, you know what I mean? Sometimes it might be my own child. You know, this just simple thing, like when your child's soccer practice is more important than you praying on time. You know, little things like that. That's problematic. That means you lost focus. You know what I'm saying? Or the fact that when they get home, there has to be warm food on the table, and therefore you haven't prayed because they might spontaneously combust because the food is not ready on the table. You know, this is a misalignment in priorities and focus. Is that making sense? So we want to have a heart where Allah is supreme. Allah and His Messenger are supreme. And I'm going to just tell you this. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala tells us in the Quran, He warns us against قُلْ إِنْ كَانَ آبَاؤُكُمْ, that in this ayah, in Surah Tawbah, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala warns us, and in this ayah He lists, I think it don't love your business, don't love your house, don't love your parents. For God's sake, these are all amazing things to love, yeah? But he's saying that the problem becomes this, that if these things become more beloved to you than Allah and His Messenger, Allah and His Messenger, وَجِهَادٌ فِي سَبِيلِهِ, and striving in His cause, then that's when you have a problem. Is when any of these halal things, we're not talking about the haram here, the halal things which we take and love in the wrong way. Honestly, that I think as believers is our biggest fitna. Because as believers, we already knew that clubbing was haram. We already knew alcohol was haram. We knew dating was haram. We don't want to say we have that. But then what happens is, in the halal, we start to develop a type of attachment, a type of worship that competes with the attachment and worship of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. In love and in fear and in dependence and in hope and in all of these things. And I can take each one of them and tell you examples of how that can happen, right? We do not have all day, right? But I'm giving you just sort of a summary. But in terms of hope, for example, sometimes, say if you're in a really difficult situation, maybe you find out that you're sick. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala give everyone good health. You find out that you're sick, and now all of a sudden you're freaking out. Naturally, yeah? You're panicked. And so what you do is, you look up and you see, okay, I have this sickness. So now I'm going to look for the best doctors. Now let me clarify. There's nothing wrong with going to the doctor. Yeah? There's actually sometimes we need to go to the doctor. And sometimes going to the doctor can be part of our worship. Right? But I'm talking about now, what's happened is a person who's now has put their hope in the doctor instead of in Allah. That's the danger. So now what happens is you now found the best doctor, right? This is the best heart surgeon or the best whatever kind of specialist for your issue. And then you go to see this doctor, you take out, all your life savings or whatever, you go, and the doctor can't help you. The doctor isn't able to cure you. So what do you do next? Well, let me find another doctor. And then you put all your hope and all your dependence in that other doctor, right? And then when that doctor can't help you, you go to another one. And it's only sometimes when we've exhausted every single means asbab, means of the creation, and then we decide, let me now make dua. Let me now turn to Allah. Because, why? Now I'm desperate. You see the problem here? The problem isn't going to the doctor. The problem is, where am I turning first? In where am I putting my ultimate and number one dependence and hope? Who's really going to cure me? Who do I really believe is going to cure me? And who do I really believe is going to save me? Is it going to be the doctor? And if it is that I think it's the doctor, then I will continue to be let down. As a rule. Because I'm putting my dependence in the wrong thing. Yeah? If you're climbing and you hold on to a twig, gravity's going to bring you down. The twig is going to break. And that's because you're holding on to the wrong things. But what we need to do is this, is realize that La ilaha illallah means that Allah is the only one who can save me. It doesn't only mean Allah is the only one I pray to. Okay? That's not the only thing it means. It doesn't just mean Allah is the only one I make dua to. But it also means that I recognize that Allah is the only one who can save me when I'm in a storm. And I'm talking not just the physical storms, but the emotional storms, the financial storms, the psychological storms, the relationship storms, the Trump storms, all different kinds of storms, political storms. We have all kinds of storms in our life, but to ultimately believe that only Allah is the one who can save you. And yes, it's okay to get and seek the means and to get help from a doctor or to get help, in whatever issue you're having. But to realize it's Allah who's going to save you. And it's Allah who's the one in charge and in control. This is a statement very deep. La hawla wa la quwwata illa billah. La hawla wa la quwwata illa billah. This is a treasure from the treasures of Jannah, the Prophet said. And in fact, la hawla wa la quwwata illa billah is one of the most powerful of the azkar in terms of there's traditions where the Prophet ﷺ told us that a person who repeats La hawla wa la quwwata illa billah, it can open up. You know, when you're in a difficulty, things are closing. You know, all doors are closed. You can't see a way out. You're like that person in the middle of the ocean, the boat, and there's just water all around, and the waves become like mountains. There's no one who can help you. La hawla wa la quwwata illa billah. And a person who repeats La hawla wa la quwwata illa billah, Allah will open for them in ways you never imagined. And there's different traditions about where the Prophet ﷺ told us La hawla wa la quwwata illa billah is a cure for something like 99 different ailments, the least of which is worry and panic and anxiety. The least of which. So that brings me now into the practical. Because I've given you concepts. You have to solve a problem, you have to first diagnose it, as the doctor knows, yeah? You have to first diagnose it, and then you can talk about the cure. So we diagnose the issue. Now we have to talk about how do we fix it? How do we cure it? I'm going to give you guys a prescription, which if we stick to this prescription, it goes very far in terms of curing our ailments, our hearts, and then protecting them. And then protecting our relationships and protecting our lives. And what I'm about to give you also goes a really long way in terms of helping us psychologically and spiritually and emotionally as well. Alright? So this is what I call the dhikr challenge, essentially. I had come up with it at the time when they were doing the ice bucket challenge. Remember that? It's totally useless, but this is actually useful. Okay? Number one is your salah. I feel the need to always mention the salah anytime I talk, because if you're a person speaking about spirituality or healing or psychology or emotion, anything like this, and you're not talking about salah, it's like a doctor or a personal trainer who's trying to help someone get ready for like a marathon and doesn't talk about breathing, you know? Doesn't talk about oxygen. And the person's deprived of oxygen, you know what I mean? The person has come to them and is deprived. There's not enough oxygen in this person's blood. They have barely enough maybe to stay alive, but they don't have enough, and the doctor doesn't even mention it. Doesn't even mention oxygen, and just starts talking about lifting weights, going to the gym. That would be silly. It wouldn't work. You have to breathe first before we can talk about anything else. Before we can talk about anything else, walking, crawling, you know what I'm saying? Nothing else. You can't do anything if you're not getting oxygen. So your oxygen for your heart and your soul is your salah, is your prayer. And if a person is finding that they're sick inside, there's a sickness, emotional sickness, psychological sickness, spiritual sickness, whatever kind of sickness, always go back and look at the salah first. Just like a doctor is going to go and look at the oxygen level of the person in their blood. How oxygenated is their blood? And if you find that the person has low oxygen in their blood, then that's the first thing you do to give oxygen. Okay? In this case, it's salah. And I'm talking right now about at least the 5 that are obligatory and on time. Allah tells us that He made salah at an appointed time. It's an appointed time. You know, we understand this with medicine, right? Doctor says, you're very sick, here's your medicine, but you have to take it 5 times a day at specific times. Otherwise, it's not gonna work. Yeah? And you're worried about, okay, if I don't do this, I'm gonna die. Would you do it? You're gonna do it. You know what I'm saying? I don't have to convince you, you're gonna do it. So salah is not only just oxygen, but it's also intent. It's a medicine that Allah has prescribed at specific times. Why? Why? Because Allah knows what He's doing. That's why. Yeah? It's because Allah knows. Allah knows what He's doing. And we would trust a doctor who is a specialist in our specific issue when the doctor gives you the prescription. But sometimes we don't necessarily trust Allah, which is also ironic. Okay? So taking care of the needs and the oxygen of the heart. One other thing I'll point out, and now that we're in Ramadan, I can hopefully make this more clear, and that is that we as human beings tend to prioritize the needs of the body over the needs of the soul. We prioritize the needs of the body over the needs of the soul. I'll give you an example of that. You know, in Ramadan, mashallah, we're all in Ramadan right now, we're fasting, inshallah, and what happens if you miss Fajr in Ramadan? Has anyone gone through the trauma? Basically, what happens is, you wake up and you realize you missed suhoor. Yeah. You get it? You missed suhoor. Let's just be real here. We're all just talking, just truth-telling here, yeah? You missed suhoor, so you're freaking out. You are in a panic. Because the reality is now you have to fast for another 13, 14, 15 hours. Yeah? What am I talking? 16. Yeah? So you're freaking out because you missed suhoor, right? So for Ramadan, 1 month out of the year, it's a big deal to miss Fajr. You see the sun and it's like you go into a panic, you're crying, you're cold sweat. But then for 11 months, when you realize that you woke up and the sun is out and you missed Fajr, how do you feel? And is it the same type of trauma and panic? You get what I'm saying? It's because our priority is our body. My stomach, yeah? My stomach. I didn't get food, right? But what about the food of the soul and the food of the heart is like we neglect it. And this is very dangerous. Can I tell you why? Because in 100 years, every single one of our bodies are going to be where? 6 feet under. Yeah, part of the dirt. That's just a fact. Okay, nobody can argue with it. Even an atheist can't argue with it. You can't. But what happens to your soul? See, I said we're worried about feeding our body, but not feeding our soul. But what happens to the body? It's going to end up in the dirt. And what happens to the soul? It continues to exist. It only moves from one realm to another. It doesn't actually cease to exist. All that happens at death is the soul moves from the dunya to the life in the grave, the barzakh. And then from the barzakh, when Allah wills, we go to the day of judgment, and then to akhirah, the hereafter. Do you understand? So the soul's staying with you. You see that? Can you imagine you're stuck with it? If it's absolutely dirty, you know the Prophet ﷺ tells us that when the souls are taken from the body and they go through the heavens, and the good souls actually smell good. There's like a smell, and who's that good soul? You know, it smells like perfume, like musk. And the bad souls actually have a stench. You ever smell something that really smells bad? Like rotten milk or eggs or something really gross or skunk? That when that soul that was neglected actually stinks. It actually stinks. But guess what? You can't go and fix it after that. And then this is the scariest part. You're stuck with it. Not for a day, not for a week, forever. Do you know forever? Like, can we wrap our minds around forever? So it's quite important that we prioritize the needs of the soul. That's just for your own personal self-interest. Because you're going to be stuck with your own soul in whatever condition it's in when you leave the body, when it leaves the body. Does that make sense? Just telling you, yeah. So, salah. Go back to working on your salah. If you're a person who doesn't pray the 5 times, do that immediately. Sort that out, because that's your oxygen. And we can't talk about spirituality and give you cool quotes and put on cool memes if we're not talking about just breathing first. Okay? So salah. And if you are praying, alhamdulillah, mashallah, tabarakallah, then go back and try to improve the quality of your prayer through understanding more of what you're saying and improving your khushu' in salah. Okay? Try to understand more deeply what it is that you're saying in salah. Learn the meaning of salah. Even if you don't speak Arabic, you can at least learn the basic parts of the salah, what it means. Allahu Akbar, Subhana Rabbiyal A'la, Subhana Rabbiyal Azim, Sami'a Allah liman hamid. these little parts of the salah, anyone can learn them, and they're very important. How are you going to have a conversation with a close friend in a language you don't understand? How close are you going to be? Well, I'm saying I'm talking to Marwa, and like I'm speaking to her in Chinese, I know the words, but I don't understand what I'm saying. We're not going to have much of a strong relationship. And that's because I don't even understand what I'm saying to that friend, right? So how can we have a strong relationship with Allah when we don't understand what we're saying to Him? Just at least understanding the basic parts of Salah and Fatiha. And even as many verses beyond that as we can, even if Arabic is not our first language. Salah's number one. Number two is the afkar. This is one of those things which I truly believe is a medicine that we've neglected. Absolutely a medicine that we've neglected. I'll tell you this. People will come to you and tell you all types of fancy things. They'll give you all types of fancy, cures and cool things. And a lot of times with these human beings, you'll be like, tell me something that I didn't already know, Tell me something new that's sitting on it, you know what I mean? It's there, but you're just not taking it. It's already there. So the Prophet ﷺ, throughout his day, remember at the beginning I said he wasn't a monk, he wasn't selling, he was involved in life, he was all of these different roles, but his heart was always with Allah. How did that happen? It's because at every motion that he was doing in life, he was remembering Allah. There was a dua. If you look at his example and his sunnah, if you just open a book called Fortress of a Muslim, you'll find there's a dua, a supplication for every single motion that the Prophet ﷺ would do. Everything. He would leave his home, there was a dua. He'd come back, there was a dua. When he began to eat, there was a dua. Finishing eating, there's a dua. Entering the bathroom, there's a dua. Leaving the bathroom, there's a dua. Before intimacy, there's a dua. There was a dua he would say for everything. And these are all absolute diamonds that he's left for us, and we've completely neglected it. Now I'm going to tell you that it is medicine. And many of us are sick because we've neglected this medicine. I absolutely believe that, wholeheartedly. That we are sick because we've neglected this medicine. The remembrance of Allah. We barely, alhamdulillah, those who pray, alhamdulillah. I think of a person who's praying 5 times a day as a person who's at least getting oxygen, okay? But maybe their diet isn't very good. Maybe they're taking in poison. Maybe they're not taking their medicine. Maybe they're alive, but they're not strong and healthy. You understand? And this is the same spiritually. Of a person who may be praying, but is not doing and has neglected the other of God. Because those of God are also medicine. So let me just put it this way to make it simple. There are apps that you can get on your phone for these of God. One of them that I like is called My Dua with 2 A's. MYDUAA. When you download this app, it's basically a collection of du'as from the Quran and Sunnah. It's authentic. Okay? When you download this app, you're going to find that, mashallah, there's a dua for everything in your life. You're worried, there's a dua. You're excited, you have something new, you got new clothes, there's a dua. Now, I'm going to tell you, it can be overwhelming. There's so many du'as. Which one do I do? I'll give you a few essentials. Fair enough? And then as more you can incorporate in your life, the healthier you're going to be. It's just like taking vitamins, minerals, medicine, organic, raw food. The more that you feed your heart with healthy food and oxygen, the healthier you're going to be spiritually, emotionally, and psychologically. That's just the way it works, just like with the body. Okay? So what are those essentials? The essential ones, I would say, are the morning supplications. That when you wake up, or after you pray Fajr, you open up your app and you click on morning supplications. And sometimes you'll have morning and evening supplications in the same link or the same button. You press that, yeah? Now when you open this up, you're going to find a lot. There's a lot of morning supplications. I'll give you guys a tip. Because in this app, there's an option you can star certain ones, and that becomes your own will, your own collection that you are going to make every day. So do that. Go through, say, here's what I can say, and be consistent. Because in Islam, The Prophet said, Allah loves the actions that are consistent, even if they're small. Consistency is key. And by the way, you realize this because no one says, it didn't work, I did a sit-up. Right? It's not working. I went to the gym and I did a sit-up. So I'm going to give up because it's not working, right? No one says that because y'all know that you have to do a lot of them. And you can't just do it once. You can't say, well, I went to the gym one day and I was there for 7 hours. So I should be good now, right? You know very well that you have to be consistent. And the moment you neglect something, then it atrophies. It's going to degenerate, right? You can't say, well, that's okay, I don't need to take a shower today. I did that last October, right? It's a consistent type of cleaning that needs to happen. You don't say, I don't need to eat today because I did last, Thanksgiving I ate a lot, You can't. You have to consistently feed and consistently clean. So spirituality is the same way. It's very simple. You have to just be consistent. So even if you pick as many as you can do consistently, start them. Then when you go back and you click on morning supplication, you'll have your own personal list. And do them every single morning after Fajr. Okay? The second one is the evening supplications. Again, you click on evening supplication. This is after Asr and before Maghrib. Okay? And the other time is before you sleep. Before you sleep, there's supplications. Again, you can make your own list from them, start them, and have that be your regimen. No matter what, this is what I do. And have it be, even if it's a small amount, but something you can be consistent in. Okay. Now I've given you this, basis. In addition to that, there's small supplications which are also very important, which you can just memorize. And that's before you eat, when you finish eating, when you leave the house, when you come into the house, when you enter the bathroom, when you leave the bathroom, and before intimacy. These supplications are also extremely important as they close the doors of the shayateen. That access, what it does is it limits and closes and protects. That's why this collection is called Fortress of a Muslim. The reason it's called Hisn al-Muslim is because it becomes a protection, a shield. It's a fortress, right? What do you do when you're in a battle? What do you do to protect yourself? You create a fortress. You and I are in a battle, folks. I'm not telling you, Allah told you. That inna shaytana kana lil-insani aduwwan. That the shaitan is an open enemy to the human being. That's Allah's words. That's Allah. And again, Allah warns us, so take him as an enemy. Realize he's your enemy. Y'all are in war. Y'all are in battle, right? I'm talking, this unseen battle that you're in is constant. It's constantly being waged. Shaitan doesn't take a break. And you're going to say, but Ramadan he does, right? And I'm going to say, even in Ramadan, only the major shayateen are tied up. The other ones, the little guys, they're still doing their waswasa. And then, of course, we have our nafs as well, right? We have our own self, our own nafs that sometimes calls towards evil, all right? So be very, very mindful of these afkar. They become a protection and a cure and a cleansing. And among these afkar, make sure that in your collection that you start, there are ones for seeking forgiveness. Make sure your collection includes Sayyid al-Istighfar. Sayyid al-Istighfar, the Prophet ﷺ said, is the best, it's the master of du'as for seeking forgiveness. Okay? Make sure that you say that one morning and evening, because the Prophet ﷺ said that anyone who recites this du'a and in the morning with full faith in it and dies before the evening will enter paradise. And if they say it in the evening and they die before the morning, they will enter paradise. Allahumma anta rabbi, la ilaha illa anta khalaqtani wa ana abduk wa ana ala ahdika wa wa'dika mastata'. A'udhu bika min sharri ma sana'ta, abu'u laka bi ni'matika alayya wa abu'u bi dhanbi faghfir li fa innahu la yaghfiru dhunuba illa anta. This dua, and read the meaning to understand what it is that you're saying. Make sure that's part of your collection that you start. The Prophet ﷺ referred to it as Sayyid al-Istighfar. Sayyid al-Istighfar. But if you want to find it in the collection, I can give you the meaning of it. Okay, Allahumma anta rabbi. Oh Allah, you are my Lord. Allahumma anta rabbi. La ilaha illa ant. There's nothing worthy of worship but you. Khalaqtani wa ana abduk. You istighfar. But I'm just concerned that if they don't start it, then they're not going to be saying it. So like, make sure you're starting this one, okay? Because and if you can say all the morning afkar, great. But some people might not be able to say all of them. So make sure you are saying the istighfar. And that istighfar is something that you're regularly doing. The Prophet ﷺ would seek forgiveness 70 and some hadiths say 100 times a day. Istighfar, he says, we're told all these benefits of istighfar. Among them is that it increases your risk, it increases your provision, and it also opens up things that are closed. When you're having a difficulty and you increase in your repentance, in your istighfar, it will open up and it will make things easy for you. This is also in an authentic hadith. So istighfar is very important to be part of your daily routine. Morning and evening, okay? La hawla wa la quwwata illa billah. I talked to you about the importance of that. Include that in your things that you're saying. And then send you peace and blessings on the Prophet ﷺ. So one of them is just saying Allahumma salli wa sallim wa barik ala Muhammad 10 times. And that's part of your, it's not like it takes a long time, but it's something that is very powerful. It's very powerful. Okay, so that was number 2. Number 3 in the dhikr challenge is the Quran. Make sure that the Quran is a regular part of your day, inside and outside of Ramadan. Okay? That it's not that only Ramadan is the month of the Quran, but that Quran becomes something that you continue to have a relationship with, not only reading it, but also trying to understand, reflect, and implement it. أقول قولي هذا واستغفر الله لي ولكم إنه غفور رحيم سبحانك اللهم وبحمدك أشهد أن لا إله إلا أنت أستغفرك وأتوب إليك. I think I can take a few questions, inshallah, before we end. Yes. park or whatever, amusement park, but it was during Ramadan. And so she's worried that, so she chose not to fast that day, but she was going to make it up. And is that having a competitor with Allah? Yes. That's a very sincere question, yeah? But what we have to do is this, yeah? When you say you don't have a competitor with Allah, here's what it means practically. It means that whenever I make a decision in my life, I ask this one question. What would Allah want me to do? That's your question. What would Allah want me to do? What would the Prophet do? Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam. That's how you have to look. And when you go and see, in order to get answers, you have to ask the right questions, right? So this is the right question. Now, how am I going to get the right answer? Then I go in and I look into it. This is where we go into asking the people of knowledge, looking into the Quran, looking into the Sunnah. So now this is, I've asked the right question, which is what would Allah want me to do? Now, how am I going to get the right answer? I have to ask the people of knowledge. What would the people, and then the people of knowledge will then tell me, okay, this is allowed, this is not allowed, this is mubah, this is halal, this is haram, this is allowed, this is makruh, this is not preferred. So that's the whole science of fiqh, that, what the scholars, what the fuqaha are doing, is that they're helping direct us to answer the question of what would Allah want me to do. So that's the answer. Yes, in the back. Could you, speak a little louder? Okay, so if I understood you correctly, you're saying, what about in cases when you're asking questions and the answers that you're getting from scholars are making you feel bad about your faith? Or they're making you feel bad about the question? Okay, so kind of like you're feeling shame about it, you're becoming shamed by the question. They're making you feel bad about it. Well, first of all, but is there like a one-stop shop? I don't know if you know of like a good, if you're doing like a fiqh, where do you go? Like, you can go to STEM Q&A, but there's like a certain way of their answers. And, it's like, there's not going to be just one place that I can think of. But alhamdulillah, like, even in Al-Maghrib, one of the things that they were doing is that the scholar, the shuyukh were each taking, it's coming out in Ramadan, like Sheikh Yasmin Mogahed was doing this, where they were taking questions and answering them in like 3 minutes, like common questions. And I also recorded like 6 of them as well. I don't think they released mine, but basically asking like a question that's common, stuff like, I don't know, can you use toothpaste in Ramadan? Yeah, and stuff like that. And what's it? Yes, 8 rakahs or 20 in Tarawih. Things like this are common questions. So that's something you can look at it. And it's nice because it's very brief and to the point. Yeah? I think there was a sister in the back. Yeah, we'll take your question then we'll close the show. Absolutely. So I'll do my best to paraphrase what she said. So we were talking at the beginning about all these different competitors and how that it's kind of all around us, whether it's in fashion or the banking industry or business or media. And so she's saying, do you think that maybe it's a good idea for instead of just sort of passively trying to dodge these things, but to actually go into some of these fields and have a Muslim presence where we have it based on Islamic principles, where we're in these fields and we create an alternative. And I think absolutely yes. For example, banking, right? We need to make an alternative, which we are starting to do, right? For mortgages and things like that, buying homes, Islamic loan, things like that, Islamic financing. That we are trying to create that, and in other fields, media, how important it is to have an alternative, to have a Muslim presence in media. I absolutely support that. One of the problems I think we've had for so long, and I'm just going to put it this way, I feel like when we chose our fields of study and our careers, we maybe were just looking at our own security, like the security of my household. And so what did we do? We became doctors and engineers. And that's it. Yeah? And that's because I need to be secure. My family needs to be secure. As opposed to how some other communities, I won't mention any names, but other communities, other religious groups weren't thinking that way. Yeah? And they were thinking more strategically about the bigger goal. And so guess what they did? They went into things like media and psychology and Hollywood. Let's be honest, they own it, yeah? So the idea is, this was strategic. It wasn't just about mysticism, and we have to be a little bit more foresighted. We have to have more foresight, and also not necessarily just think about our own individual security and our own individual paycheck, but more think about the ummah and what the ummah needs. Okay? أقول قولي هذا واستغفر الله لي ولكم إنه غفور رحيم سبحانك وبحمدك أشهد أن لا إله إلا أنت أستغفرك وأتوب إليك